Hi all, this is Sean with the Association of Gleaning Organizations, and today we are going to be sharing our SARE simplified presentation with you all. This is a training video you can use for volunteers or staff members who are participating in SARE who maybe don't have time to watch the other hour and a half training video that we made. This will walk you through how to take in-field measurements on on-farm food loss and backyard food waste. So let's jump right in with our first step. The first step that you need to do is gather the needed supplies. So we have a video here from one of our partner organizations walking through that step.
Okay, so I came out today prepared with a printout of the questions, and we have our scale for weighing A, B, and C quality out in the field, and we also brought our measuring tape to do the bed measurements.
So as shared by this partner organization, you need at least a 25-foot measuring tape to measure your row length or the circumference of the backyard trees. You need a scale and the scale to weigh your produce. You can do this back at your office, but if you can do it in the field, it might be that much easier. And then ideally, you should bring a hard copy of the data gathering form just in case you don't have good internet connection. So once you've done this, you're going to have to determine your sample size. And this will be determined by which of the four different measurements you're taking. First, for commercial row crops. These are crops that grow in the ground that are being grown for commercial purposes. So there must be a harvest that had happened in this field for a for sale event. So if the field wasn't harvested and was grown by a commercial farmer before, it won't qualify for a commercial row crop. Um, but any in-ground crops not grown on trees that were previously harvested for sale fall into commercial row crops. The same is true for commercial fruit tree crops. The only difference here is they were fruit trees grown for commercial purposes. This could be you-pick orchards or, their own processing plants or, just general sales. And then if they don't fit into one of those categories, they'll fit into one of the other two. So we have non-commercial row crops. These are any field row crops grown that weren't previously harvested for commercial purposes. So if you're harvesting a field on a farm that has never been harvested before, you'll put it in this non-commercial row crop category. And then non-commercial fruit trees as well. This can be backyard community gardens or orchards not harvested for commercial purposes this year. And the reason for this distinction is we are measuring two things. With the non-commercial, we're trying to understand the availability of food resources in communities that aren't currently being utilized. So this can be community gardens, backyards, food bank gardens, all those other pieces. With commercial crops, we're trying to understand something slightly different. We're trying to understand how much food is left after commercial harvest. This is why you cannot put unharvested commercial fields or orchards in these two categories because they'll skew the data of how much is left from these other sources. So if you're doing a commercial row crop sample, we have a couple different measurements here to understand. First is the desired sample size is 325-foot rows. This means that if you are harvesting rows that are longer than 25 feet, you don't need to mark or you don't need to sample that whole area. The sample process may be slightly different than your normal gleaning process, so you do not need to sample this whole area. Uh, the minimum sample size is 50 square feet. So if you're not harvesting or for some reason cannot sample 325-foot rows, we ask that you just sample 50 square feet for us. And remember, for these samples, we need you to harvest 100% of the produce in the area. This includes, any edible crops or any crops in the area, even if they're not fit for human consumption. So to do so, you'll use a measuring tape to accurately measure the row length and width. When measuring the width, you should measure from middle of the row to middle of the row, because what we're using this measurement for is to understand if a full acre was available, what would be the projected food loss on that acre? And if you leave out the walkways, um, that will really skew the number. So when measuring the width, you can measure from the middle of the row to the middle of the row or middle of the walkway to the middle of the next walkway to give us an accurate width, and then measure the length. The field must have been previously harvested, as I mentioned before. If not, use the non-commercial row crop form. It will be helpful if you ask the farmer some information about the number of acres in production and other growing practices. So let's watch
Brigham.
this
I'm the
quick
farm gleaning
video.
coordinator for Urban Gleaners, and we're out here today doing some measurement for AGO's USDA SARE project. So we're starting to glean this bed of tatsoi. We have volunteers working on it right now, and I'm going to go down with a measuring tape and measure the length of the bed as well as the width so we can have accurate measurements for the research project. So I am measuring the first 25 feet of this tatsoi bed.
Well, I got rid of all, I used to, sorry. And actually, when I lived in California, it was such a long growing season, like all year. I grew a lot of my food. But now, and so I used to have a garden, but then I developed my farm.
Okay.
And I built 2 acres on it, so there's not really big. I have
So you'll notice that she put her
planters.
um,
Brigham, I'm the farm gleaning coordinator for Urban
sorry about
Gleaners,
that, guys.
and we're out here today
Pause that for
doing
a second. So you'll notice that she did put her harvest knife in the ground there to show the area that she wanted to measure with that. It's really important that you clearly mark where the volunteer should be measuring. If you decide to harvest longer than 25 feet and sample longer than 25 feet, that's totally fine. We just need to know that width, but you're not required to. As mentioned, as shown here, our desired sample size is 25, 3 25-foot rows. Okay. So now we have commercial farm fruit trees. These are orchards, or fruit trees on a commercial farm. The minimum in the desired sample size here is 3 trees. This is because sometimes in an orchard, trees can be much heavier laden than other trees. And so to make sure we're getting an adequate sample size, we're asking you to sample 3 trees. We're also asking you to try to harvest 100% of the tree. If you're not harvesting 100%, that's okay if it's not possible, but we ask you to harvest everything within the identified harvest area. So, for example, if you're only harvesting stuff that can be reached from the ground, pick the damaged fruit that can be reached from the ground, the misshaped fruit that can be reached from the ground, and the perfect fruit that can be reached from the ground. No cherry picking here. Get all of the harvest. You will need to ask the farmer the total number of acres in production, or the total number of trees per acre in production, or what is the planting density? That's the question. So, this can be anywhere from 100 trees to 1,000 trees, depending on the size of those trees. And what this helps us know is the size of those trees. So we're asking you to ask, what is the planting density? And if only a quarter of an acre has been planted, please times that number by 4 to give us the planting density of 1 acre in production on these farms. Next, we have non-commercial row crops or community gardens, food bank gardens, all of those kind of stuff. Our desired sample size here is the same in commercial row crops. It's 25 feet, 3 25-foot rows, with a minimum sample size of 50 square feet. Again, same thing applies here as in the commercial row crops. You need to harvest everything in that sample area. You need to accurately measure the walkways as well as the rows so that we get accurate measurements for our acreage estimates. And you should ask the grower about their growing practices if possible. And remember to harvest 100% of the produce in that sample area. Also, in this case, if it turns out that this is a commercial farm that has not been harvested, please put it in this. And there's a little box you can click that tells us it was a commercial farm. So thank you. Okay, so lastly, we have non-commercial fruit trees. This is a little bit different than others. Our minimum sample size is at least 40 pounds, or the tree must be 25 inches in circumference, and you must harvest at least 75% of the tree. So if the tree ends up being less, if your harvest ends up being less than 40 pounds, that's okay, as long as the tree was significant size. So that's why we've set this 25 inches in circumference and harvesting at least 70% of the tree. We don't want you to record 10 pounds and say you harvested 10% of the tree. If you are, we're just doing one tree here, but if it's easier for you to do multiple trees, there's a place in the form to put in the number of trees that you've harvested. And then we ask you to give us the average um, circumference of those trees that you harvest and the average percentage of the tree that you've harvested. Ideally, we want 100% of these trees, but if it's not possible, just harvest everything within the identified harvest area, same as in a commercial fruit tree zone. So the thing you're going to measure is the circumference of the tree. We're going to watch a short video here, and then I'll talk through how you can do that on your own.
Okay, we have here a nice big tall apricot tree. I'm going to take some measurements here and then show you how we're doing this. Okay, this is Daniel. He's one of our volunteers and he's got a degree in forestry, so he's going to be our data reporting person for this tree. So what are we seeing, Daniel?
The circumference is about 63 inches, right at maybe 2 feet off the ground. But then over at the typical chest height, it is 2 different trees, 2 different stems. So the first one is about 45 inches. And then the second one, we'll measure this kind of funny, right around here. That one's 43 inches.
So 43 and the other one was?
45, I think.
Okay, and then...
All right. So as you'll notice, he measured 2 different places. That's because this tree had split before it got to chest height. Ideally, you're going to measure the circumference at chest height. But if you split before it gets there, you're going to measure the branches at chest height. So in this case, there's 2, and add those together. But you're also going to measure the base of the tree before it splits. And you're going to enter the larger of those 2 numbers. So in this case, it would be the sum of the 2 branches at chest height because they're larger than the 60-some inches that it was at 2 feet off the ground. So that's the measurement you put in, and that helps us understand the size of the tree. I want to say something about this data collection. If you happen to miss this piece on 1 or 2 of your trees, that's okay. Please just enter the data. Or, if you forgot to get farm information on a farm, that's okay. Enter the data. What we really want to understand here is get the best data we can, but also make it as simple as you can. If you're constantly not getting this data, we're obviously going to push back and ask you to go back and get it before you get stipend for these. But if it's an occasional thing, we'd much rather have the data and have you get the stipend for just missing 1 or 2 pieces of information.
Okay, we have here a nice big tall apricot.
Now, the last thing you're going to do is you're going to sort and weight the produce in your sample. This should be weighed into pounds to the nearest half pound. So the weight of A grade produce, this is marketable produce. We're asking for your discretion on these categories, but for A grade, we're saying if I would find this normally at the grocery store, it should go in A grade. For the B grade, this is stuff that is fine to eat. It may have minor pest damage or be misshapen or be small or have some blemishes on it, but it's fine for human consumption, but you wouldn't normally find it at a grocery store. And then C grade produce is anything you wouldn't feel comfortable giving to someone else to eat. This could have significant pest damage. It could be, damaged, eaten partially, this kind of stuff. And just a note on why we're measuring C grade produce before we see this great video of an infill sorting that volunteers are doing. Um, Many folks have come to us and said that, or we know that one of the common misconceptions about availability of produce in fields and elsewhere is that most of it is C grade. It's not really fit for human consumption. And by measuring that number, we get to say, A, is this assumption that we hear often true? Or B, is it false? And can we help address that false narrative by showing how much more A and B grade produce there is compared to C grade? So let's watch this video. I like this video because the folks are measuring in the field with their volunteers. You don't have to do it this way, but it is a nice way to reduce your own workload.
Good morning, we're gleaning today. We're on peaches. So how we're doing it is we have crates and they're labeled B. This looks like an A. Yes, that looks like an A. So we've talked about let's see, A. You know, A is picture perfect, B has some flaws, and then C is compost. And then our C's go in here. And so we weigh them. I tear the bucket so I know how much the bucket weighs. And today we're doing a minimum of 3 trees. We did this tree, we're on this tree, and we've done this tree over here. We may or may not do a couple more, but we're doing at least 3 trees on the peaches and the apples today.
So I love that simple way of measuring in the field. You notice volunteers are clearly noted which trees they're supposed to be harvesting. It just sort of helps the whole process run smoothly.
Good.
All right, so when you're done with this, you're going to enter your data into the form. There's 4 different forms as we spoke about earlier. And then 5, you're going to submit for billing. We ask that you submit billing, $100 for data collection from urban fruit trees and $200 for on-farm crops if you do 1 crop. And you can do 2 crops in the same glean if you want on the farm, and you get an extra $50 for that. Right now, we don't have a cap. Normally, the cap is 2 samples per organizations per week, but that cap is lifted at the moment, so please continue to put these in. Once you've done this, we ask that you submit 1 invoice per month for organization. There are a lot of you out gathering this information, and that helps us with our bookkeeping on the back end. Please submit the previous month's invoices by the 5th of each month. Please do not submit invoices for 2 months on the same invoice. So please don't submit stuff for July and August. USDA does not like us billing that way. They like us billing by each month. And so please submit the full months by the 5th, and then I'll do my best to have checks out to you by the 15th, if not sooner. And if it's your first invoice, please submit a short video like these videos showing how you're sorting the produce and how you're taking your measurements. This just helps us ensure the integrity of the data. Thank you guys so much for your help with all of this. Really appreciate it.